The town of Mill Ridge, Ohio, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. Tucked between rolling fields and pine-covered hills, it was quiet, predictable, and proud of it. The one thing that broke its sleepy skyline was Mill Ridge Federal Prison, a hulking slab of gray concrete that sat like a watchful beast over the town. And just above it, on the hill overlooking the compound, stood a tidy white house with green shutters, the home of Martin and Elaine Porter. To most, the Porters seemed like the picture of stability. Martin had been warden at Mill Ridge for nearly a decade, a man known for his discipline, fairness, and authority. Elaine, his 32-year-old wife, was the kind of woman who smiled politely at church picnics and baked for the neighborhood fundraisers. Together, they represented respectability, the kind of couple small towns love to hold up as proof that decency still existed. But inside that white house, the silence had grown heavy. Every evening, Elaine would stand by the bedroom window, staring out at the prison lights flickering below. From that height, the compound looked almost peaceful, rows of cells glowing faintly like lanterns in the dusk. But to her, it wasn't peace. It was a reminder of how trapped she felt. 15 years of marriage had slowly drained the color out of her life. Martin was dedicated, responsible, and utterly unreachable. His days stretched from dawn briefings to late-night incident reports. Even when he was home, his mind never left the prison walls. Their dinners had become quiet rituals, two people chewing over the same conversations, the same silences. She had once loved him fiercely, back when he was just a young corrections officer with big dreams and that sharp, commanding voice that made her heart race. But ambition had replaced affection, and the man who once whispered about growing old together now only spoke in procedural terms. Sometimes, as she watched him drive away toward the prison gates each morning, Elaine wondered when she had stopped being a wife and started being a warden's accessory, another thing that belonged to the institution. That's why, when the local Women's Council invited her to join a literacy volunteer program for inmates, she didn't hesitate. For the first time in years, something inside her stirred. She told herself it was about helping others, but deep down, she knew it was about helping herself. The program met twice a week inside the prison library, a forgotten corner of the facility that smelled of dust and old paper. The first day she walked in, she expected fear or hostility. Instead, she was met with quiet curiosity. Among the rows of inmates sat Daniel Cross, a man whose calm presence set him apart. He was older than most, mid-40s, neatly kept, and polite to a fault. When he spoke, his voice carried the cadence of someone once used to lecturing a classroom. She learned he had been a professor of literature before being convicted of financial fraud, a story that both fascinated and unsettled her. Their first conversation was about the Count of Monte Cristo. Fitting choice for a prison library, Daniel had said with a half-smile. Elaine laughed softly. A story about revenge and redemption. Maybe we're all looking for a bit of both. That line lingered with her long after she left the prison that day. Over the next few weeks, she found excuses to arrive early, to stay longer. The library began to feel like a world apart, a place where she wasn't just the warden's wife, but Elaine, a woman who could still be curious, passionate, alive. Daniel listened when she spoke. He remembered the books she mentioned. He asked about her writing, her favorite authors, her dreams. Things Martin hadn't asked in years. Outside, spring was softening the harshness of the hills. But inside Elaine, something more dangerous was thawing, a quiet longing that she didn't dare name. From the window of their home, the prison looked smaller now, almost harmless. But Martin noticed a change in her, a light in her eyes, a quiet hum in her step. At first, he was grateful, and he started to wonder, because in Mill Ridge, even from the top of the hill, nothing stayed hidden for long. It started with small things. A new perfume on Elaine's dresser, a brighter shade of lipstick, the way she hummed while setting the dinner table, a tune Martin couldn't place. He'd notice it in passing and tell himself it meant nothing, just signs that his wife was finally happy again. But soon, the little changes began to bother him, like faint scratches on a polished surface he couldn't ignore. Inside the walls of Mill Ridge Federal Prison, Elaine's happiness had found its forbidden source. Each Tuesday and Friday, she walked through the metal detectors, carrying a bag of books and the faintest excitement she'd felt in years. The library had transformed since the first day she'd arrived. Once dusty and forgotten, it was now neat, labeled alive. Daniel Cross had a way of creating order out of chaos. He organized the shelves by author, started a small reading circle, and introduced Elaine to novels she'd never heard of. "Books," he'd said one afternoon, sliding The Great Gatsby across the table toward her, "are the only form of escape the system can't confiscate." Elaine smiled. "You talk like a free man." "Maybe because freedom," he replied, "starts up here." He tapped his temple and then, after a pause, his heart. That line stayed with her long after their lesson ended. The literacy program became more than a volunteer task. It became the pulse of her week. With each visit, the line between teacher and student blurred. Sometimes Daniel would read to her aloud, his voice low and calm. Sometimes she'd forget the razor wire outside, the security guards beyond the door. In that small room filled with secondhand books, she wasn't Mrs. Porter, the warden's wife. She was Elaine, the woman who laughed, questioned, and dreamed again. Martin began to notice the change. He came home early one night to find her sitting at the kitchen table, writing in a notebook, smiling to herself. "What's that?" he asked. "Oh, just notes for the book club," she said quickly, closing the cover. "Book club." His brow furrowed. "You never mentioned that. It's part of the program. The inmates who can already read, we discuss literature." He didn't like the sound of that. The idea of his wife sitting across from convicted men, talking about feelings, redemption, life, it unsettled him. At dinner, he tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but the name slipped out again. Daniel recommended something new. Elaine said casually, cutting her chicken. Martin's fork froze midair. "You're on a first-name basis now." She blinked, realizing her mistake. "It's just habit. Everyone calls him that in class." The rest of the meal passed in silence. Later that night, Martin sat alone in his office. On the shelf behind him were commendations, certificates, plaques, all reminders of the order and control he'd built his life around. But in his own home, that control was slipping through his fingers. The next morning, he called an old acquaintance, a retired investigator named Michael Crane, and asked for a discreet favor. While Crane began his quiet surveillance, Elaine was oblivious. She spent her mornings preparing lesson plans, her afternoons in the library, and her evenings rereading the same books Daniel mentioned. Sometimes, she found herself searching for traces of him in the words, his thoughts, his regrets, his tenderness. One afternoon, as they packed up after class, Daniel caught her gaze lingering on him. The air between them changed, charged with something unspeakable. "I shouldn't say this," he murmured, "but you make this place human again." Elaine's heart pounded in her chest. For years, she'd been starved of that simple recognition, of someone seeing her, not as the warden's wife, but as a woman capable of being admired, even desired. That evening, Martin came home late again. The house was dark except for the soft glow from the study. Elaine was at her desk, reading. Her lips moved silently, as if repeating a line from the book in her hand. Martin stood in the doorway, watching her. There was something in her eyes, a warmth he hadn't seen in years. But it wasn't for him. 2 days later, Crane returned with a flash drive and a grim expression. "The camera's in place," he said, "in the old maintenance corridor, near the supply room, exactly where she meets him. Motion activated. Should start recording by tomorrow." Martin took the drive, his jaw tightening. "Good," he said quietly. That Friday, while Elaine prepared a thermos of coffee and homemade cookies for the class, Crane's camera blinked to life. Inside the small, forgotten room, Elaine spread a tablecloth across the old desk. Daniel arrived minutes later, smiling. They talked, laughed softly. Then, almost as if drawn by gravity, she reached for his hand. The camera caught it all. The look in their eyes, the gentle touch, the kiss that ended a decade of silence. And on a flickering laptop screen miles away, Martin Porter watched it happen. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just stared, his reflection faintly visible in the screen until his knuckles turned white against the edge of the table. Because in that moment, the warden stopped being a husband. He became a man preparing for justice, his own kind of justice. The following Monday, the motel room smelled of stale coffee and tension. Martin Porter sat on the edge of the bed, his posture stiff, his eyes fixed on a laptop screen. Beside him, investigator Michael Crane clicked through files in silence, the kind of silence that made every sound feel louder. On the screen, Elaine appeared again. The hidden camera had caught another meeting. Her smile, Daniel's voice, the easy, almost intimate rhythm between them. Martin's jaw twitched. "You sure you want to keep watching this?" Crane asked quietly. Martin's voice was steady, but his knuckles were white. "Play it." The footage continued, Daniel reaching across the table, brushing his fingers against Elaine's wrist. Then a kiss, brief but undeniable. Crane paused the video and exhaled. "There's your proof. If you want me to pull back now." "No," Martin interrupted. "Keep going. I want everything." Crane hesitated before sliding another folder across the table. "Then you'll want to see this too." His name, Daniel Cross. Ring a bell? Martin frowned. "Should it?" Crane opened a file of financial records, yellowed with age. Cross wasn't always an inmate. 15 years ago, he was a financial consultant. Worked for Meridian Investments. The name hit Martin like a fist to the chest. Meridian, the scandal that had wiped out his inheritance, his father's legacy, everything he'd worked for as a young man, just starting out. He had trusted an advisor named Daniel Cross. Crane didn't notice the color draining from Martin's face. According to court documents, he defrauded several investors out of close to $1 million. One of them, he tapped a page, was you. The room seemed to tilt. The years collapsed. Martin remembered sitting in his car outside the courthouse all those years ago, watching the headlines destroy what little pride he had left. Local officer loses family savings in investment scam. He'd vowed never to speak of it again. And now, that same man, that thief, was sitting across from his wife every week, quoting poetry, touching her hands. Martin stood abruptly, pacing. His reflection in the motel mirror looked unfamiliar. Eyes hollow, jaw tight, like a man who'd been hollowed out from the inside. "You think this was a coincidence?" he muttered. "He knew who I was." Crane shrugged. "Maybe. He's smart. Manipulative. You want me to dig deeper?" Martin nodded slowly. "No, you've done enough." He closed the laptop and stared at the blank screen, his own reflection staring back. Behind him, the cheap lamp flickered, its light stuttering like his breathing. That night, Martin drove home through the empty streets of Millridge, past the church, the diner, the grocery store that closed at 6. Everyone slept peacefully beneath the hum of streetlights, unaware that the warden of their town's prison was unraveling. Elaine was asleep when he got home. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall. She looked fragile under the lamplight, innocent, even. But the images from the footage burned in his mind, her hand on Daniel's, her lips meeting his. In the morning, he didn't wake her. He drove straight to the prison. Inside his office, the buzz of fluorescent lights and the smell of old coffee filled the air. He opened the inmate medical database, scrolling until he found Daniel Cross's file. HIV positive confirmed. The words froze him. He clicked again, checking the dates. The test had been updated 2 weeks ago. The lab report showed Cross had been notified. Martin leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. It was almost poetic, he thought, the con man who ruined his life now carrying a death sentence of his own. But as he stared at the screen, a new thought took root, dark and deliberate. If Elaine's affair ever came to light, she'd become a scandal, the subject of gossip in every corner of Millridge. But if that same affair led to infection, if the town believed she'd been exposed to something unthinkable, then the shame would destroy her long before the truth ever could. Martin's eyes hardened. "You wanted to play me again," he whispered. "But this time I write the ending." That afternoon, he called in a favor from a technician in the medical wing, a man who owed him for turning a blind eye to a contraband smuggling incident months earlier. The favor was simple: change the data, adjust the files, make the right names appear in the right places. By evening, the records were rewritten, Now, if anyone ever looked at the system, they'd see the same diagnosis not just for Daniel, but for Elaine Porter. And just like that, Martin's revenge was set in motion. Not the kind you read about in thrillers or courtroom dramas, but the quiet kind, the kind that eats people alive from the inside. He turned off the monitor and sat in the dark, the glow of the prison lights flickering through his window. Down below, Daniel Cross was likely asleep, dreaming of freedom. Martin Porter was wide awake, dreaming of justice. The storm came without thunder, just a low, steady rain that painted the windows gray. Elaine Porter sat in her car in the parking lot of Ridgeville Medical Clinic, her fingers locked around a folded piece of paper that felt heavier than it should. The engine was off. The world outside was quiet except for the rhythmic tap of water against glass. She had known before she saw the result. The doctor's expression had said enough. But still, reading the words on the page had made her heart seize. HIV positive. 3 syllables. A lifetime collapsing. Her first reaction wasn't fear, it was disbelief. Then came the nausea, a cold, crawling wave that began in her gut and reached her throat. The air seemed to disappear inside the car. In her mind, every moment of the past month replayed with brutal clarity. Daniel's laughter, his words about redemption, the kiss in the library, the way his hand had lingered on hers. She could hear his voice now. You make this place human again. Had he known? She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel, trembling. The question burned through her like acid. He had known. He must have. That night, back at home, the walls of the house seemed closer than ever. Martin was working late again, as always. The clock read 10:47 when the phone rang. It was Dr. Marisol Vega from the prison infirmary, her tone polite but probing. Mrs. Porter, I just wanted to thank you for your contribution to the literacy program, Vega said. It's been a great success, especially with Mr. Cross. He's made real progress. Elaine tried to sound casual. That's good to hear. There was a pause on the other end. Then the doctor added, almost too carefully, you've been looking pale lately. Are you feeling all right? Elaine's grip tightened on the receiver. Just tired. I've been busy. Understandable, Vega replied. But if you've been feeling unusually fatigued, I'd suggest a full physical. Just routine, of course. Something in Vega's voice made Elaine's stomach twist. When the call ended, she stood there for a long time, the phone still pressed against her ear, as if waiting for someone to tell her what to do. The next morning, she drove 2 towns over to Ridgeville, where no one knew her name. The clinic was small, discreet. When the results came back hours later, her world ended quietly, without screaming or sound, just the rustle of paper. Now, sitting in her parked car, she felt hollow. How long had he known? The last time they met, Daniel had seemed distracted, almost nervous. He'd said he had something important to tell her. She'd thought it was about the future, plans, hope, maybe even love. But it hadn't been. Her vision blurred with tears. In her mind, she saw Martin's face, calm and kind, the face of a man she had betrayed. For a moment, guilt pierced through the fog of horror. But it was quickly replaced by something darker, rage. By morning, she had made a decision. When Tuesday came, she entered the prison earlier than usual, her steps sharp, her face pale but determined. The guards nodded respectfully as she passed. The keycard Martin had given her granted access to almost every corridor. The moment she opened the library door, Daniel was already there, waiting. He smiled when he saw her, but the smile faded when he saw her expression. "We need to talk," she said flatly. He gestured toward a chair, uneasy. "What's wrong?" Elaine didn't sit. She reached into her bag, pulled out the folded paper, and tossed it onto the table between them. "Explain that." Daniel stared at the document. The color drained from his face. "You got tested." "Of course I got tested." Her voice cracked. "You told me you were fine. You looked me in the eye and lied." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "I wasn't lying, not at first. I didn't know until 2 weeks ago. I swear I was going to tell you." "You were going to tell me?" She laughed bitterly. "When?" "After you killed me." He took a step forward. "Elaine, please listen." "Don't touch me," she shouted. Her voice echoed down the narrow corridor. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel's eyes were full of regret, but she couldn't see it. only betrayal. And then the sound of heavy footsteps broke the tension. The door swung open. Martin Porter stood in the doorway, calm as stone. "Mr. Cross," he said evenly, "step away from my wife." Daniel froze. Elaine turned, her pulse racing. Martin's face was unreadable, his eyes dark and steady. "There's been an incident," he continued. "For your own safety, I'm placing you in isolation." Elaine opened her mouth to speak, but Martin cut her a look that silenced her instantly. He didn't yell, didn't threaten. He simply stared at Daniel with a kind of quiet fury that was worse than shouting. "Let's go," he said. As Martin escorted Daniel down the hall, Elaine stood motionless, shaking. She didn't know yet that her husband had seen everything, that he had watched the video, read the reports, and already rewritten the story in his mind. She only knew one thing. The man she had loved had betrayed her, and the man she had married was suddenly a stranger. And somewhere deep inside, both of them were about to destroy her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The corridors of Mill Ridge Federal Prison had a strange kind of silence that night. Thick, expectant, the kind that hummed beneath the fluorescent lights. Daniel Cross walked between two guards, wrists cuffed, his face pale but composed. Beside him, Warden Martin Porter led the way, his pace steady, his voice calm. "For your safety," Martin said, the words smooth and official. "We've had tensions among inmates. You'll stay in isolation until things settle down." Daniel didn't answer. His mind was still spinning from the confrontation in the library. The look of betrayal in Elaine's eyes, the venom in her voice. He wanted to explain, to tell her the truth, that he'd learned about his supposed diagnosis only 2 weeks ago, that he'd never meant to hurt her. But now he was being led deeper into the prison, into the quiet wing where no one asked questions. When the cell door clanged shut, Martin lingered just long enough for the guard to step away. "I'll handle this," he said smoothly. The guard nodded, oblivious. Daniel sat down on the narrow cot, staring at the floor. "You think you're protecting me," he said softly. Martin turned toward him, the fluorescent light catching the edge of his badge. "Protecting you?" He let out a dry laugh. "You think that's what this is?" Something in his tone made Daniel's stomach drop. Martin moved closer, his face expressionless. "You knew who I was when you came here, didn't you? Meridian Investments. 15 years ago." Daniel blinked. "What, Meridian?" "You were one of the investors." "One of the victims," Martin snapped. "You took everything my father left me. Everything I worked for." Daniel swallowed hard. "Mr. Porter, I didn't even handle individual portfolios back then. I was a consultant." "Save it." Martin's voice went cold again. "You ruined my life once. And now you've come back for my wife." Daniel stood, panic flickering behind his calm exterior. "Elaine doesn't know anything about that. She's innocent in all this. You can't." Martin stepped forward until they were inches apart. "You infected her." Daniel froze. "What are you talking about?" Martin held up a sheet of paper, the falsified medical record, like a weapon. "I have your results. HIV positive." "You knew." "That's not." Daniel's breath caught. "That's not possible." "Oh, it's possible," Martin said quietly. "And now, you've condemned her to die." Daniel shook his head, desperate. "She got tested, didn't she?" "She told you." Martin's face hardened. "She's positive." Daniel stumbled back, his knees hitting the bed frame. No, that can't be right." "Oh, it's right." Martin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial and syringe. "You see, I've been patient, Daniel. I've followed the rules my whole life. But rules don't deliver justice. Men do." Daniel's breath quickened. "You're not thinking straight." "I've never thought clearer," Martin said. He filled the syringe slowly, the clear liquid catching the sterile light. The hiss of air being pushed out of the needle sounded louder than anything else in the room. "Sedative," Martin explained coolly. "Quick, painless. I'm not a monster." Daniel backed up until the wall met his spine. "Martin, listen to me. You've been lied to. Someone tampered with those results. I can prove it." But Martin wasn't listening. His eyes had that glassy calm of a man who'd already crossed the line. "On your knees," he said. Daniel stared at him, shaking his head. "You're out of your mind." "On your knees," Martin repeated, voice like ice. Daniel sank slowly to the ground. For the first time, the mask of defiance slipped. His voice broke as he said quietly, "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her." For a moment, just a heartbeat, something flickered across Martin's face. Pity? Guilt? It was gone as quickly as it appeared. He stepped forward and pressed the needle to Daniel's neck. The prisoner didn't resist. His eyes closed. His last thought wasn't of revenge or fear. It was of Elaine's smile under the pale light of the prison library. The injection took seconds. The silence afterward lasted longer. When Martin finally moved, he worked with meticulous precision. He looped a bedsheet around the ceiling pipe, tied the knots cleanly, lifted the lifeless body, and made it look like suicide. Then he tore a scrap of paper from the inmate's journal and wrote, "I can't live with what I've done." 15 minutes later, guard Jim Randall found the body. The radio crackled with panic. "Code blue, isolation ward. Inmate down. Suicide, looks like hanging." By morning, the story spread through the prison like wildfire. The official report was tidy. Inmate Daniel Cross, found deceased. Cause of death, self-inflicted. No one questioned the warden's presence that night. No one noticed the faint red mark on the inmate's neck. No one except Dr. Marisol Vega. During her examination, she paused. A small puncture near the vein. Odd placement. Too precise. She looked up at Martin, who stood in the doorway, watching. "Is something wrong, doctor?" he asked softly. Her throat went dry. "No, sir," she replied, closing the report. "Everything's clear." When he left, she exhaled shakily. She knew something was terribly wrong, but she also knew better than to accuse the warden of murder without proof. Outside, the prison lights flickered against the dawn. Inside, the truth was buried under concrete, paperwork, and fear. And though Daniel Cross's body was gone, his death was only the beginning. For 2 days, the official report sat neatly on Warden Martin Porter's desk. Inmate Daniel Cross. Deceased. Suicide by hanging. It was the kind of report that ended stories in prisons like Millridge. Clean, efficient, unchallenged. But for Dr. Marisol Vega, the prison's medical officer, it was the beginning of a nightmare. That morning, she couldn't stop seeing the tiny puncture mark on Daniel's neck. It was small, almost invisible, but in medicine, details like that mattered. And something about the way the warden had stood over her as she signed the death certificate left her with a chill she couldn't shake. By the 3rd day, she made a decision that could destroy her career. She contacted Detective Laura Hayes, the county investigator assigned to review unusual inmate deaths. Vega's voice trembled as she explained she had information but needed to meet off the record. They met that evening at a small cafe off Route 67, the kind of place with one tired waitress and a neon sign that buzzed louder than the customers. Vega sat in a corner booth, her hands clasped around a mug that had gone cold. Laura arrived 10 minutes late, trench coat soaked from the drizzle outside. She flashed her badge, then slipped it back into her pocket. "You said you didn't want to talk on the phone," she said quietly. "What's this about?" Vega hesitated, scanning the room before speaking. "The warden's story doesn't add up." Laura leaned forward. "Go on." There was a mark on the inmate's neck. An injection site. "It's not in my report because..." She trailed off, guilt flickering across her face. "Because he was standing right there while I did the exam." Laura scribbled notes in a small leather pad. "You think the warden killed him?" "I think," Vega whispered, "that Daniel Cross didn't kill himself. And I think Martin Porter is hiding something." Laura's expression hardened. "Then I'll need access to medical files, surveillance logs, anything you can get without raising suspicion." "I'll try," Vega said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if he finds out..." "He won't," Laura assured her. "I'll make sure of that." But Millridge was a small town, and secrets didn't stay buried for long. That night, Vega went back to her office under the pretense of finishing paperwork. The corridors were quiet, just the hum of ventilation and the occasional echo of a guard's footsteps. She logged into the system and pulled up Daniel Cross's medical history. As she compared the most recent test results with older ones, her stomach twisted. The timeline didn't make sense. Results had been altered, dates mismatched. And not just for Daniel. A second file, marked Elaine Porter, had been edited on the same day. Vega's breath caught. She realized then that someone had manipulated both files, using the same system credentials, Martin's credentials. She copied everything onto a flash drive, then shut down the terminal and slipped the drive in her coat pocket. She didn't hear the faint click of a camera flash in the hallway. Across the prison yard, Martin stood in his office window, watching the lights of the medical wing. His jaw was tight. The technician he'd paid to update the files had warned him someone might notice the inconsistencies. Now he was sure. Dr. Vega was digging. The next morning, Laura Hayes filed for a search order to access Millridge's internal records. It would take 2 days to process. 2 days too long. By that afternoon, Vega hadn't returned home. Her car was found parked outside her house, the door ajar, her purse still inside. A neighbor reported hearing a scuffle around dusk. At 8:47 p.m., a patrol car found her vehicle wrecked in a ravine off County Road 9. Airbag deployed, driver's side door smashed in, blood on the steering wheel, but no body. Detective Hayes arrived at the scene within the hour, flashlight trembling in her hand. The muddy ground showed drag marks leading into the woods, then disappearing. "Search the perimeter," she ordered, her voice tight. "She's out here somewhere." As officers fanned out through the rain, Laura's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed out of it." No signature, just those words. Laura looked up toward the prison lights, glowing in the distance. She'd seen enough cover-ups to know what she was walking into. Millridge wasn't just a correctional facility anymore. It was a crime scene, and the warden was at the center of it. The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky over Millridge County stayed the color of old steel. Detective Laura Hayes stood in the warden's empty driveway, her hand pressed to her radio, eyes fixed on the open garage. The car was gone. So was Elaine Porter. Martin's sudden disappearance didn't surprise her. It confirmed everything she already feared. The falsified medical files, the missing doctor, the messages threatening her to stay out of it. He was unraveling, and now he'd taken his wife. In Martin's office, a half-empty coffee cup sat beside a stack of neatly folded documents, pay stubs, pension records, and an old map of the northern mountains. A red circle marked a single spot in thick ink. A cabin. Laura didn't wait for a warrant. Within an hour, she and 2 deputies were in an unmarked SUV, heading into the winding back roads of the Appalachians. The radio crackled with spotty reception. The pine trees grew dense, swallowing the sunlight. The higher they climbed, the more the world below seemed to vanish. At that same hour, inside the mountain cabin, Elaine Porter lay bound to a bed frame with nylon rope. Her face was streaked with tears, her voice hoarse from screaming. Martin sat across from her at a small wooden table, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. "You don't understand," he said quietly, staring at the fire. "I did this for us." Elaine's voice shook. "You killed him, Martin." He turned toward her, his expression almost tender. "He destroyed my life once. I wasn't going to let him do it again." Her breath caught. "You lied to me. About everything. The test results, the files, the diagnosis." Martin smiled faintly. "Oh, Elaine, that's the irony. You were never sick. None of it was real." She froze. "What?" He stood and walked toward her, setting the glass down beside the bed. "I faked it. His records. Yours. All of it. You see, Daniel Cross ruined me 15 years ago. Took my inheritance, my reputation. I lost everything. And then, fate brought him here, right under my command." He knelt beside her, his voice lowering to a whisper. "I just wanted him to feel helpless. The way I did. And when you got involved, when you fell for him, well, it became poetic. You both believed the same lie. That you were doomed. That he'd infected you. That's what I wanted. Fear, shame, humiliation. Justice." Elaine's tears came hot and silent. "You call that justice?" Martin's jaw tightened. "He made me into this. You don't know what it's like to live with that kind of betrayal." She stared at him, eyes wide with horror. "No, Martin, you made yourself into this." For a moment, his composure cracked. He turned away, pacing, his hands trembling. "It doesn't matter anymore," he murmured. "They're coming for me. They found Vega. She's alive." Elaine's heart leapt. "Then let them find you. You can still end this." He shook his head, almost smiling again. "Oh, I am ending it. But not the way you think. From his briefcase, he pulled out a syringe and a vial of clear liquid. Do you know what this is? Her voice broke. Please don't. Peace, he said softly. For both of us. We'll go together. No prison, no trial, no shame. Just quiet. He filled the syringe slowly, his movements calm, methodical. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but growing closer. Elaine began to sob. Martin, please. Shoo, he whispered. It doesn't hurt. Zachary didn't even feel it. The sound of tires on gravel cut through the storm. Martin froze. Through the cabin window, red and blue lights flickered against the trees. Martin Porter. Detective Hayes's voice rang out, firm and commanding. Step away from her. He turned toward the door, his expression calm. Too late, he said quietly. Before anyone could move, a gunshot split the air. When the officers burst in, Martin was slumped in the chair, blood spreading across his chest. The syringe lay shattered beside him. Elaine was sobbing, her wrists raw from struggling against the ropes. Get her free, Laura shouted. Two deputies rushed forward, untying her. Elaine collapsed into Laura's arms, trembling. He said I wasn't sick, she whispered. He lied to everyone. He killed him, and he lied. Laura held her close, her jaw tight. I know. It's over now. On the table, beside the whiskey glass, lay a folded note in Martin's handwriting. I take full responsibility for the death of Daniel Cross and the attack on Dr. Vega. My mind is clouded with jealousy and resentment. Elaine is innocent. Forgive me. Laura read it twice before setting it down. Outside, the storm was easing, but the wind still carried the smell of rain and smoke. She looked at the dead warden, then at the woman he'd almost destroyed. Justice, she murmured, always finds its way out of the dark. And for the first time in weeks, the lights of Mill Ridge Prison flickered quietly below, no longer the beacon of control Martin had built, but the reminder of how far one man had fallen trying to keep it. By dawn, the mountain road was crowded with flashing lights and the echo of radios. Paramedics moved briskly through the mist, deputies carried evidence bags, and Detective Laura Hayes stood on the porch of the cabin, staring at the body of Warden Martin Porter. He looked strangely peaceful in death, his hand still resting near the pistol, his uniform soaked dark with blood. The man who had ruled Mill Ridge Prison with precision and discipline had ended his life with the same grim control that had defined him. Inside, Elaine Porter sat wrapped in a blanket, trembling as a medic cleaned the rope burns on her wrists. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, as though something inside her had been permanently switched off. Laura knelt beside her. You're safe now, she said softly. Elaine looked at her blankly. Safe, she repeated, as if testing the word for the first time. He said I wasn't sick, that he faked everything. Was that true? Laura nodded. It's true. The lab confirmed it this morning. The results were altered. You were never infected. Elaine pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. The tears came fast and silent. Grief, relief, and disbelief all at once. Later that morning, the search team uncovered a small safe hidden behind a panel in the cabin wall. Inside were documents that told the whole story. Medical forgeries, financial ledgers, and a collection of photographs that spanned 15 years, surveillance of Daniel Cross, records of Meridian investments, and copies of old court filings. It was all there, carefully archived, a diary of obsession. Martin had been planning his revenge long before Daniel's transfer to Mill Ridge. Even the literacy program that had brought Elaine and Daniel together was part of his design. He orchestrated everything, Laura told her team quietly. He didn't just react, he built the entire stage. By mid-afternoon, news of the case spread across the state. Warden's deadly secret read one headline: Affair, Lies, and Murder Inside Mill Ridge Prison. Reporters called it one of the most disturbing cases of psychological manipulation the county had ever seen. But for those who lived it, the story wasn't about scandal. It was about survival. 3 weeks later, Elaine sat in a quiet courtroom as the district attorney formally cleared her of any wrongdoing. She spoke only once, thanking Detective Hayes and Dr. Marisol Vega who was recovering from her injuries and had testified via video link. Outside the courthouse, reporters called her name, but she kept her head down, clutching her coat against the wind. When asked if she had any words about her late husband, she simply said, "He wanted control." In the end, that's what killed him. She moved to Portland soon after, under a new address, a new start. For months, she avoided mirrors, unable to face the reflection of a woman who had loved both a criminal and a killer. Therapy came slowly. Writing helped more. On her desk, a single sheet of paper bore the opening line of her memoir. Some prisons don't need bars. They live inside the people who build them. Detective Hayes visited her once, nearly a year later. They met at a small coffee shop by the harbor, the kind of quiet place Elaine liked now. "Still writing?" Laura asked. Elaine smiled faintly. "Every day. It's the only way I can remember without breaking." Laura nodded. "You've come a long way." Elaine looked out at the gray water, her voice calm. "Sometimes I still see his face. Both of them. Daniel, when he smiled at me like I was more than a warden's wife. And Martin, when he stopped being my husband and became something else. But then I remind myself, I survived them both." Laura didn't reply. She didn't need to. As the detective left, a soft drizzle began to fall over Portland, the kind that erased footprints and softened the world. Elaine stood in the doorway, watching until the rain swallowed the street. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom.